Lo que verás en esta historia cambiará tu manera de confiar en el amor y en la familia para siempre. Quédate hasta el final porque lo que parecía un matrimonio perfecto en Boston se convertirá en una pesadilla de traición, dinero y justicia. Antes de continuar, asegúrate de estar suscrito al canal y cuéntanos desde qué ciudad nos estás viendo. Esta historia, no podrás dejar de escucharla. My world shattered with the force of 6 words. Your daughter is in intensive care. The sterile hospital air stung my lungs as the receptionist's voice echoed in my head. Just 30 minutes earlier, I'd been wheeling my suitcase through my front door in Beacon Hill, still carrying the scent of European cafes and Mediterranean breezes, expecting to surprise Emily with Parisian chocolates and Italian leather. Instead, I found an unopened envelope from Massachusetts General Hospital leaning against my doorframe, collecting dust for days. How long had she been there? I gripped the counter knuckles, white jet lag forgotten, as adrenaline surged through my veins. Mrs. Lawson-Reed was admitted 6 days ago following a severe auto accident. The receptionist's professional detachment only heightened my growing panic. The ICU was on the 4th floor, 6 days. My only child had been fighting for her life for 6 days, and I had been taking selfies at the Trevi Fountain oblivious. The elevator ride to the 4th floor stretched into an eternity. My mind raced with questions that grew more frantic by the second. Why hadn't Jason called me? I'd left my international contact information with both of them. Had something happened to him too? The ICU doors whispered open, revealing a nurse's station where a middle-aged woman looked up from her computer. "I'm Margaret Lawson," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the earthquake inside me. "My daughter Emily Lawson-Reed is here. I just found out." Recognition flashed in the nurse's eyes. Her badge read Linda. "Mrs. Lawson, we've been trying to reach family members all week." Her voice held a note that sent ice through my veins. "Your daughter's condition has been critical since admission." "Where's her husband?" I demanded. "Jason should be here. He should have called me immediately." Linda's eyes flicked toward a colleague before returning to mine. "Mr. Reed was here briefly during admission. He signed the initial paperwork but hasn't returned since. We've called him multiple times regarding medical decisions." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. "That's impossible," I whispered, though something cold and certain was already forming in my gut. He wouldn't just leave her. Linda's expression remained neutral, but her eyes told a different story. "Dr. Naveen Shah is your daughter's attending physician. He'll be making rounds soon to discuss her condition. Would you like to see Emily now?" I nodded, suddenly terrified of what awaited me. "I should prepare you," Linda said gently as she led me down the corridor. "She has extensive injuries and is currently on ventilator support. Nothing not her warning. Not my decades of professional composure. Not the countless crisis management situations I'd navigated in my finance career could have prepared me for the sight that greeted me when we entered room 412. My beautiful, vibrant Emily lay suspended in a web of medical technology. Tubes snaked from her mouth, her arms disappearing beneath the thin hospital blanket. Her face, the face I had memorized from her first newborn moments, was swollen beyond recognition, mottled with deep purple bruising. A surgical dressing covered the right side of her head where they had clearly operated. Casts encased her left arm and right leg, elevated slightly on pillows. The steady beep of heart monitors and the rhythmic whoosh of the ventilator were the only sounds in the room. "Emily," I choked out softly, taking her unbandaged hand. Her skin felt cool beneath my fingers, nothing like the warm, animated daughter who hugged me fiercely before my vacation. "I'm here, baby. Mom's here now." Linda checked various monitors with practiced efficiency. "She's been stable for the past 48 hours, which is a positive sign. The neurosurgery team successfully reduced the intracranial pressure from her head trauma." "What exactly happened?" I managed to ask, not taking my eyes from Emily's face, searching for any flicker of response to my voice. According to the police report, her husband was driving. The vehicle was traveling at approximately 90 miles per hour when it lost control and hit a concrete divider. Linda's clinical description couldn't mask the horror of what she was saying. "Your daughter wasn't wearing a seatbelt. She was partially ejected through the windshield." My knees buckled. Linda guided me quickly to the chair beside the bed. "And Jason?" I asked, a strange calm descending over me as something primal began to replace shock. "Was he injured?" "Minor lacerations and bruising," she said quietly. "He was treated in the ER and released that same night." Released. The word hung in the air between us. Jason had walked away from the crash with scratches while Emily lay shattered, fighting for every breath. I'll need copies of all her medical records, I said, my voice dropping to the precise, measured tone that had made junior executives tremble during my 30-year career. And the police report. Linda nodded, seeming almost relieved by my composure. I'll have everything prepared, and Mrs. Lawson, it's good you're here. She needs an advocate right now. After she left, I leaned close to Emily's ear, careful not to disturb any of the equipment keeping her alive. Listen to me, sweetheart, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to find out exactly what happened, and I promise you I will get answers. I squeezed her hand gently, hoping somewhere in the darkness of her unconsciousness she could feel I was there. Then I pulled out my phone, the executive in me taking control while the mother in me fought back tears. The questions hammered in my mind with every beep of Emily's heart monitor. Where was Jason? Why hadn't he called me? Why would he abandon his wife in this sterile room of machines and tubes? What could possibly be more important than being by her side? My fingers hovered over his contact. I'd start with a simple text, no accusations, no emotion that might make him defensive, just a mother looking for her daughter's husband during a crisis. Jason, I'm at Massachusetts General with Emily. Please call me immediately. I sent it, then turned back to my daughter, gently brushing a strand of hair from her forehead, careful to avoid the bruising. I'm going to find him, Emily, I whispered. And I'm going to find out why he left you here alone. The monitor beeped steadily as I settled into the chair beside her bed, my body exhausted from travel but my mind razor-sharp with purpose. My European vacation felt like a distant dream now replaced by a single mission: discover the truth about what happened to my daughter and why the man who vowed to love her in sickness and in health was nowhere to be found. I had no idea then how deep this rabbit hole would go or how dark the answers would be. But as I watched my only child fight for her life, one thing became crystal clear. Whoever Jason Reed really was, whatever he was hiding, he had picked the wrong mother to underestimate. What you're about to hear isn't just a story about tragedy. It's about the 6 minutes that shattered a mother's world and forced her to become someone she never imagined she could be. Stay until the end, because one small clue buried in a hospital hallway might change everything you believe about accidents and about love. The sound of the ventilator still haunted every corner of my mind, that soft mechanical rhythm that kept my daughter alive when I no longer could. Boston's winter sunlight filtered through the narrow ICU window, bleaching the color from everything it touched. I sat there motionless, listening to each artificial breath and wondering if Emily could hear me through the fog of medication. I kept replaying the timeline like a prayer gone wrong. 6 days. 6 days I'd been walking through Parisian cafes, smiling at strangers, taking pictures of bridges, while my only child fought for her life in a sterile room 4,000 miles away. Every mother fears that call in the night. I got mine too late. The guilt came in waves so heavy I could hardly breathe. If I hadn't taken that trip, if I'd called more often, if I'd noticed that something between Emily and Jason had changed. But regret doesn't keep anyone alive. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I made lists. Names, phone numbers, doctors, police contacts. A habit from 30 years in finance: control the chaos before it controls you. Nurse Linda entered quietly with a clipboard. Mrs. Lawson, Dr. Patel will update you shortly. Emily's vitals remain stable. Stable, such a fragile word. When Linda left, I leaned closer to Emily's bruised face. You're not going anywhere, I whispered. Not until I know the truth about what happened, because deep down something about the accident didn't fit. The police report said Jason had been speeding 93 miles an hour, intoxicated, possibly texting. But Jason was methodical, obsessive even, the kind of man who polished his watch twice a day. He didn't lose control. He calculated it. And yet part of me still clung to the version of him Emily had loved: charming, ambitious, too smooth to be careless. Maybe denial is a mother's anesthesia. 2 hours later, Detective Ramirez returned. His face carried that blend of compassion and bureaucracy you see on men who deliver bad news for a living. We've obtained new footage from a traffic management camera near the crash site, he said. It shows something we didn't notice before: another vehicle following close behind your daughter's car moments before impact. My breath caught. Following or chasing? He hesitated. We can't confirm intent yet. The second car disappears from frame right before the collision. What make I demanded? A dark SUV, no plate visible. Could be coincidence, but we're reviewing additional angles. Coincidence, another fragile word. When he left, I stared at the door long after it closed. If someone had been tailing them, who and why? The thought twisted my stomach into knots of terror and purpose. Maybe Jason wasn't just reckless. Maybe someone wanted Emily hurt. That night, I walked the hospital corridors until the janitors started nodding at me like I belonged there. The hall outside the ICU was silent except for the hum of vending machines. I stopped at the small window that overlooked Storrow Drive, the same highway where the crash had occurred. Cars moved below like veins of light, orderly, predictable, until one swerved too sharply. My pulse quickened. I could almost see it, Jason's BMW spinning glass exploding, Emily screaming. I pressed my hand to the cold glass. Who were you running from? At 2 a.m., unable to rest, I found myself in the hospital's family lounge. The television was muted, but captions crawled across the screen. Boston police seek witnesses in fatal I-93 accident. I froze. Fatal. I turned the volume on. The anchor continued. Authorities confirmed the passenger remains in critical condition at Massachusetts General. Investigators are reviewing nearby security footage that may reveal a second vehicle involved in the crash. So the news was out. I looked around the empty lounge. A half-finished cup of coffee sat beside a crossword someone had abandoned mid-sentence. I took a sip of cold bitterness and pulled out my phone. There was a missed call from an unknown number timestamped the day of the accident. No voicemail, just silence. By morning, the world outside had begun again, hospital staff changing shifts, machines beeping, life resuming its rhythm as if mine hadn't stopped. Dr. Patel entered, composed as ever. Mrs. Lawson, Emily's intracranial pressure is stable. We're cautiously optimistic. Will she wake up? I asked. He paused. We hope so. Brain injuries are unpredictable. Talk to her, keep her grounded. Sometimes they hear more than we think. After he left, I took Emily's hand. They found another car, I said softly. Can you hear me? You're not alone in this. We'll find out who was behind you that night. Her fingers didn't move, but her heart monitor blipped slightly faster. Maybe coincidence, or recognition. Later that day, Ramirez called again. We've traced the SUV to a rental company in Cambridge, rented under a fake ID. We're working on surveillance from nearby gas stations. Do you think Jason knew the driver? Too early to tell, he replied. But the timing's strange. Whoever it was, they were there less than a minute before the crash. After we hung up, I stared at my reflection in the hospital window, a woman who used to believe in fairness, now watching her daughter breathe through a machine. I promised Emily I wouldn't leave her side, but promises don't solve mysteries. 2 days later, exhaustion caught up with me. I fell asleep in the recliner beside her bed and dreamed of headlights, twin circles burning through fog, coming closer faster. Emily was in the passenger seat screaming my name. When I woke, a soft hand rested on my shoulder. Nurse Linda again. You should eat, Mrs. Lawson. I'm fine. Starving yourself won't help her. She hesitated. You asked about the other car. My husband works traffic control for the city. He mentioned something odd. One of the cameras downtown caught the same SUV an hour before the crash, parked outside a restaurant near Beacon Hill. My pulse raced. What restaurant? Kavanaugh's, Jason's favorite steakhouse. Coincidence no longer. That evening, I drove to Kavanaugh's. The maitre d' recognized me immediately. Years of charity events with Emily and Jason had made us regulars. Mrs. Lawson, he said cautiously. Terrible news about your daughter. Thank you, I replied. I just need a receipt copy from last Friday, Jason Lawson reservation for 2. He looked uneasy but complied. Here you go. They left around 10:47 p.m. 10:47. The crash occurred at 11:06, 19 minutes. Do you remember who was with him? He hesitated. A man in a dark coat, didn't catch a name, paid in cash. A man, not Emily. I walked out into the cold night, the receipt trembling in my hand. Back at the hospital, I found Ramirez waiting. We reviewed the Beacon Hill footage, he said. You were right to be suspicious. The man leaving the restaurant with Jason matches the build of the SUV driver, though his face is obscured. So Jason wasn't alone, I murmured. Ramirez nodded. We think the SUV followed them after they left the restaurant, still determining motive. Motive. I glanced toward Emily's room, the woman Jason had vowed to love, now fighting for breath. What could be motive enough for this? That night, as machines hummed and my daughter's monitor pulsed green against the darkness, something inside me shifted. The shock hadn't disappeared. It had crystallized into something harder, focused. If Jason had secrets, I'd find them. If someone had tried to harm my daughter, I'd uncover why. The investigator in me was born out of sheer necessity, the survival instinct of a mother who refused to lose. I opened my notebook and wrote a single line across the top. Who was in the SUV? Underneath, I listed everything I knew: times, names, footage, sources, witnesses. The pattern was forming, faint but real. Somewhere between 10:47 and 11:06, Jason met someone who changed the course of both their lives and mine. Outside, dawn painted the Charles River silver. I watched the sunlight crawl across the floor of the ICU and touch Emily's hand. For a heartbeat, I imagined she squeezed mine in return. "You hold on, baby," I whispered. "We're not done yet." Then for the first time since returning from Europe, I smiled not out of joy but out of certainty. The world had stopped once. I wouldn't let it happen again. Now before we continue, tell me what you think. Was the SUV just coincidence? Press 0 if you believe it was an accident, or 1 if you think someone planned it. Because what I discovered next proved one of those answers was dead wrong. They say betrayal doesn't come with thunder, it comes with silence. And that night, sitting by the glow of my laptop in the ICU room, I began to understand what silence really sounds like. Emily slept beneath the hum of hospital machines. The doctors called it medically induced rest. I called it the longest night of my life. Outside, Boston shimmered with frost and headlights. Inside, I stared at a paused frame on my computer screen, the grainy image of that dark SUV tailing Jason's car. The timestamp read 11:04 p.m., 2 minutes before impact. The police were still analyzing, but I had spent decades reading people budgets and lies. I didn't need more analysis, I needed truth. Detective Ramirez had promised updates in the morning. I couldn't wait that long, so I started digging. Emily's purse sat on the chair beside me, returned by the paramedics. Inside was her phone, still locked by facial recognition. When I held it near her bruised face, the screen blinked open, a cruel irony of modern love and technology. Her recent messages showed nothing unusual. Grocery lists, work reminders, dinner, Jason 10 p.m. Beacon Hill. But the banking app caught my eye. Emily was meticulous with money. She had inherited that from me. And yet there it was, a transfer for $42,000 made the morning of the accident to an unfamiliar entity called North Harbor Consulting LLC. Consulting for what? I opened my notebook and added a new question beneath who was in the SUV, who is North Harbor. At 6 a.m., Ramirez arrived with a folder under his arm and coffee that smelled like burnt courage. "Morning, Mrs. Lawson," he said, handing me a cup. "We confirmed the SUV was rented under a forged driver's license. The ID belongs to a man who died 3 years ago in Florida." My heart sank. "So it's a dead man driving?" "Looks that way," he said. "We're tracking the rental payment. It came from a shell company." I stared at him. "Called North Harbor Consulting." He froze. "How do you know that name?" I turned the laptop toward him. "Because that's where $42,000 of my daughter's money went hours before the crash." Ramirez's jaw tightened. "Then we're not dealing with coincidence anymore." By mid-morning, I met with Timothy Price, my longtime financial advisor, via video call. "Maggie." I pulled the corporate records, he said, eyes narrowing behind reading glasses. North Harbor Consulting was registered 6 months ago by a man named Grant Ellison. The name rang a bell I didn't want to hear. Grant Ellison had been Jason's best man. Timothy continued. "Ellison used Jason Lawson's address as his mailing office. That's your smoking gun. Betrayal stories are rarely simple. They branch like poisoned vines, money, loyalty, love, all intertwined, and this one was starting to choke me." At noon, I left the hospital for the first time in days. The wind off the Charles River cut through my coat as I walked to Jason's office downtown. The receptionist, a young woman with sharp bangs and the expression of someone who'd seen too much, looked up in shock. "Mrs. Lawson! Oh my God, I heard about the accident! How's Emily?" "Alive," I said evenly. "Barely." She lowered her voice. "Jason hasn't been in since that night. He called once from Florida, said he needed to handle a situation." Florida, the same state where the SUV identity originated. I kept my voice steady. "Did he mention Grant Ellison?" She hesitated just long enough to confirm the truth. They were arguing about money, something about a transfer that couldn't be reversed. Back at the hospital, Emily remained unconscious. Her nurses moved quietly like ghosts in white. I sat beside her and began to read aloud old letters from her college days. It was part comfort, part plea. "You remember what you used to write me," I whispered. "Mom, I want a life built on truth, not secrets." "Well, darling, you got your wish. We're swimming in them now." That evening, Ramirez called again. We found footage from a parking garage near Kavanaugh's. Jason and Ellison met there 20 minutes before the crash. "Do you have audio?" "Unfortunately, no, but it looked heated." Ellison handed Jason something, could be a flash drive. I closed my eyes, visualizing every frame. The SUV, the money, the flash drive. Pieces of a puzzle whose picture I already feared. What if I said slowly Jason wasn't being followed that night, but was leading someone to Emily? Ramirez didn't answer. The silence was enough. Later, I opened Jason's Instagram, something I'd avoided since the first night. There were new posts from Florida, photos of sailboats, beaches, cocktails. And in one of them, just barely visible in the background, stood Grant Ellison. Same shirt as the parking footage. That was the moment the anger settled in me like stone. cold, precise, and unforgiving. Betrayal stories aren't about rage. They're about clarity. The moment you realize the enemy has been sitting at your dinner table all along. By Friday morning, Emily's condition had slightly improved. Dr. Patel noted that her brain pressure was dropping. Positive trend, he said, and smiled for the first time. For the first time, I allowed myself to breathe, just for a moment. Then Ramirez appeared at the doorway. "Mrs. Lawson, we executed a search warrant on Ellison's office." And he set a sealed evidence bag on the table. Inside was a burned USB drive, its edges melted, but its label still visible, NH Project E. "North Harbor, Project E," I read aloud. E for Emily. That night, I stood in the hospital chapel. The stained glass cast patches of red and gold across the floor. I wasn't sure why I was there. Prayer had never been my strong suit. But anger is its own religion if you hold it long enough. I whispered into the empty room. "Whatever you did, Jason, whatever you planned, you made one mistake. You left me alive." Saturday brought a call from Timothy. His tone was sharper than usual. "Maggie, I traced the funds from North Harbor. They were funneled through 4 accounts before ending up in the Caymans." "For what purpose?" He hesitated. "Life insurance premiums, large ones, taken out under Emily's name with Jason as the sole beneficiary." The room spun. It wasn't just betrayal, it was blueprint. When Ramirez arrived again, I handed him Timothy's report. He flipped through the pages, his eyes darkening. "This is bigger than reckless driving," he said. "This is premeditation." He paused at the door. "Mrs. Lawson, have you ever heard the term staged accident?" "Yes," I said quietly. "And you're telling me my daughter was the target?" He nodded. In that instant, every trace of doubt evaporated. The SUV, the money, the fake ID, it wasn't a random night. It was a plan gone wrong. Or maybe miraculously right because Emily had lived. I spent that night writing, every detail, every timeline, every transfer. It was no longer just a mother's grief, it was a case file. I didn't realize until the early hours how calm I felt. Cold calm as the eye of a storm the moment before everything changes. At sunrise, I opened the curtains and watched light spill across the city that had nearly taken my daughter. "This isn't over," I said to the glass, "not by a long shot." The next day, as church bells rung somewhere outside, Emily's finger twitched for the first time. I leaned forward, heart pounding. "Em, it's Mom. You're safe. You hear me. You're safe now." Her hand tightened weakly around mine. A single tear slipped down her cheek. "Don't worry," I whispered. "I'll make sure he never gets away with this." Betrayal stories may begin with trust, but they always end with reckoning. And ours was just getting started. If this story moved you or made you feel something deep in your gut tap like so more people can hear it. Because the truth we're about to uncover next will shock you more than any betrayal you've heard before. There's a moment after grief when something shifts, when tears dry, when shaking hands still and all that's left is focus. For me, that moment came 3 days after learning my daughter's crash wasn't an accident. It was a design, a transaction, a betrayal disguised as love. And I intended to dismantle it piece by piece. Boston had turned gray again, the kind of muted winter palette that made every window look like a mirror. I stood there in the reflection of the ICU glass, watching my own face harden into something new. Not the mother, not the victim, the strategist. Dr. Patel's rounds had become the only rhythm of my days. Emily's progress was steady but slow. Her brain swelling had reduced, but consciousness remained just beyond reach. "She's fighting," he told me that morning. "We see positive neural responses." So was I, doctor, I thought, just in a different kind of war. Detective Ramirez returned mid-afternoon bringing the one thing I didn't expect, an evidence envelope. He placed it gently on the hospital table beside Emily's untouched flowers. This was recovered from the wreckage, he said. The car's data recorder similar to a black box on airplanes. It captured 30 seconds of audio before and after the collision. I stared at the sealed plastic like it was a live grenade. "Have you listened to it?" He hesitated. "Yes, you should too." He left me with a flash drive and a silence that seemed to expand in every direction. I waited until night. Nurses came and went. The halls quieted. Then I plugged my laptop in and pressed play. Static first, the faint hum of an engine, a woman's voice, Emily saying something faintly like "Jason, slow down." Then a man's voice, low, measured, eerily calm. "Don't worry, just one more call. Make sure the policy clears before midnight." Then the sound of screeching tires, metal grinding, impact, and silence. The room spun. I hit replay over and over until every syllable carved itself into my bones. "Make sure the policy clears before midnight." He wasn't just negligent, he was executing a plan. The next morning, Ramirez confirmed what I already knew. "We've verified the audio." The timestamp matches the insurance policy activation window. Jason Lawson intended that crash to happen before the policy expired. I closed my eyes, breathing slowly, forcing composure into every muscle. So we can charge him with attempted murder. He nodded. We're building the case. But building wasn't good enough. I wanted it airtight, bulletproof. The kind of case even the slickest defense attorney couldn't wiggle through. Years in corporate finance had taught me one thing: paper trails never lie. I set up my headquarters at home that night, a fortress of documents, monitors, and printed statements. The same skill set that once balanced billion-dollar portfolios now had a new target: my daughter's would-be killer. I worked through the night, cross-referencing bank transfers, insurance forms, and timestamps from the hospital logs. By dawn, a pattern emerged. Jason had opened 3 shadow accounts under variations of Emily's name. Each funneled money through different LLCs tied to his friend Grant Ellison. One of those accounts had made the policy premium payment precisely 12 hours before the crash. And the deposit, it originated from North Harbor Consulting, the company Jason and Ellison had built together. Timothy called at sunrise, his voice low and serious. "Maggie, I found something worse," he said. Jason leveraged Emily's trust fund as collateral for a loan 6 months ago. It's tied to a Cayman account still active under his name. "Can you freeze it?" "Not without a court order. But if you authorize me to act as power of attorney." I didn't let him finish. "Do it. Every cent he touched goes dark." He paused. "You understand this will make him desperate." "Good," I said. "Desperate men make mistakes." By mid-morning, Ramirez texted again. "We've traced the SUV's rental to Ellison's corporate card. He's missing." I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. Then Jason isn't the only one with blood on his hands. 2 days later, the financial freeze went live. Jason's accounts blinked into zeros like dying stars. Within hours, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Rebecca," came Jason's voice, too calm, too smooth. "You've been busy." "Don't call me Rebecca," I said coldly, "and don't use my daughter's money again." He laughed softly. "You think you can beat me at my own game?" "I already have." There was a pause, then that same tone I'd heard on the recording. "You always underestimated me, Maggie. But remember this: when you play with fire, people get burned." He hung up. I sat in the quiet, the line still humming in my hand, and realized something chilling. He wasn't afraid. Not yet. So I changed tactics. Justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about precision. If Jason was the architect of this disaster, then I'd become the architect of his downfall. I drafted a strategy plan like a hostile takeover. Phase 1, financial freeze. Done. Phase 2, legal alignment with Ramirez's team. In progress. Phase 3, media leverage. Bring the story into daylight before Jason could twist it. For 20 years, I'd watched men like him manipulate truth for profit. This time, I'd weaponize the narrative first. 3 days later, Boston Channel 9 ran the headline, "Local woman critically injured in suspected insurance fraud crash, husband under investigation." The story went viral overnight. Reporters camped outside the hospital. And Jason's name, once associated with luxury real estate, now appeared beside the words betrayal and fraud. I watched the coverage in silence, sipping black coffee that had long gone cold. Some called it vengeance, I called it balance. That evening, Nurse Linda whispered as she adjusted Emily's IV. "The whole city's talking about it." "You're brave, Mrs. Lawson." "Not brave," I said softly. "Just done being silent." But justice never comes without resistance. At 11 p.m., Ramirez called again. Jason's attorney filed a motion claiming the recording is inadmissible, says the data was corrupted. "We'll fight it, but it'll take time." Time was something my daughter didn't have in abundance. "Then we make the court of public opinion our ally," I said. "Leak statements, whatever it takes." Ramirez chuckled dryly. "You ever think about joining law enforcement?" "I prefer outcomes," I replied. Sunday morning brought a new development. A courier arrived with an anonymous envelope addressed to me. Inside was a USB drive unmarked and a single line written in bold black ink. He wasn't working alone. I played the file on my secure laptop. It was an email thread between Jason and Ellison. The subject line read, "Final coordination, E-Project." Ellison's message: "She's resisting the transfer. Make it look natural. No seatbelt means higher payout." Jason's reply: "Understood. We'll drive late, less traffic." My breath stopped. Every nightmare I'd imagined was written in plain English. By noon, I was in Ramirez's office. He scrolled through the evidence grim-faced. "This is it," he said. "Direct premeditation. We can push for attempted murder." "Do it," I said. He hesitated. "There's one more thing. We traced the anonymous sender a burner email created at Massachusetts General's public Wi-Fi. The hospital." He nodded slowly, someone on the inside. I looked toward the window, the skyline framed in gray. Then that's where I'll start looking next. That night I sat once more beside Emily's bed. Her face looked peaceful, but machines still did the breathing for her. "I found them, sweetheart," I whispered. "Jason and his friend. They won't touch another woman again. I promise you that." Her heart monitor kept its steady rhythm calm, deliberate, alive. I closed my eyes and allowed myself to feel something I hadn't in weeks. Not relief, not peace, something rarer. Control. In business, power isn't loud. It's quiet. It's knowing you have the leverage before anyone else realizes it. That was me now. Quiet power. But power attracts danger. At 2:11 a.m., my phone vibrated again. A text message from an unknown number. "Stop digging, or next time it won't be your daughter." I stared at it until my vision blurred. Then I took a screenshot, saved the number, and sent it to Ramirez with a single line. "He's afraid now." As dawn broke, I stood by the ICU window, the city just beginning to wake. The sun cut through the clouds like a promise. I leaned close to Emily's ear. "You keep fighting your battle, baby. I'll keep fighting mine." Because the blueprint was complete, and soon it would be Jason Lawson's turn to crash. If you're still here listening, thank you. These aren't just betrayal stories, they're survival stories. If you believe truth always finds its way through darkness, tap like, so we keep shining light on it together. The message on my phone burned through the darkness long after I'd set it down. "Stop digging, or next time it won't be your daughter." There are threats that sound theatrical, and then there are the ones that hum with quiet truth. This one felt like the second kind. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the hospital chair, my back to the window, my eyes fixed on the steady rhythm of Emily's heart monitor. The beeps were uneven, sometimes almost human, like the sound of someone trying to find her way back. By dawn, the city had softened under a pale orange light. Nurses changed shifts. The smell of coffee drifted through the corridor. I was still there, unmoving. Then something impossible happened. Emily's right hand twitched. It was tiny, almost imperceptible, but it was real, a flutter of muscle, a message from somewhere deep within her. I whispered, leaning close. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" No answer, just another flicker. But for the first time in weeks, I felt air return to my lungs. Hope doesn't roar when it arrives, it whispers. Dr. Patel came quickly. He examined her, murmuring to his nurse, checking reflexes, pupils' response to light. "There's activity," he confirmed. "A good sign. The swelling is decreasing faster than expected. She may regain consciousness soon." I nearly broke down right there, but I didn't. Because right behind the wave of relief came something else, fear. If Jason knew Emily was improving, he'd realize the one person who could testify against him was waking up. I spent the rest of the morning with Ramirez reviewing the threat text and the anonymous email that had delivered the incriminating documents. "We've traced the message to a prepaid SIM purchased in Miami," he said. "Likely Jason or someone working with him. And the hospital email. Still investigating. But it came from within these walls. Possibly a staff member." The thought made my stomach tighten. Someone inside the same building where my daughter lay helpless, and they were feeding him information. "How do we stop him from getting near her?" I asked. Ramirez exhaled. "We can't assign full-time protection without proof of immediate danger, but I'll have an officer patrol the floor tonight." It wasn't enough. I'd spent a lifetime building risk models, predicting crises before they happened. This was no different, except the asset I was protecting was my child. That evening, I walked through the hospital like a general inspecting a battlefield. Every hallway light, every open door, every face became data. At the security desk, I requested access to the previous night's footage. The guard, a young man with the soft patience of someone used to grief, hesitated. "Ma'am, only law enforcement can—" I slid Ramirez's card across the counter. "Detective's authorization. He's expecting my report." The guard blinked, unsure, then nodded. The footage played in silence: elevators, parking lots, side entrances. For an hour, nothing. Then, at 2:14 a.m., a figure appeared on the northeast camera, tall, dark coat, baseball cap. He stood near the ambulance bay, partially obscured by shadow. He lifted a phone, appeared to take a photo of something or someone, then walked away. The image froze as I leaned closer. Even in low resolution, I'd know that profile anywhere. Jason Lawson. I printed the still frame, slipped it into my folder, and left the desk without a word. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. Adrenaline, anger, disbelief, all mixed into one quiet storm. He was here, watching, and if he was close enough to take photos, he was close enough to try again. I returned to Emily's room. She looked the same, peaceful, unaware, but the air felt heavier now, as if the walls themselves knew we were being hunted. I sat beside her and whispered, "He's out there, Em, but so am I." For a long moment, I just held her hand and let the steady rhythm of the monitors remind me she was still here, still fighting. Then I noticed something. Her eyelids fluttered. I leaned forward. "Emily." A faint sound escaped her lips, not a word, but a breath of vibration. Her fingers twitched again. Tears blurred my vision. That's it, baby, come back to me. Her lips moved barely audible. Mom. The room spun around me. I hit the call button for Dr. Patel. She spoke, I said breathlessly when he arrived. She said, Mom. Dr. Patel smiled, that calm, professional kind of joy. That's an excellent sign. Keep talking to her. She's finding her way back. I turned to Emily again, brushing hair from her forehead. You rest, sweetheart. Just rest. But inside me, something else was awakening too, something colder, sharper, because every inch of progress she made brought us closer to danger. The next afternoon, I received a new text, this time from an unknown email address linked to a burner server. She's awake, isn't she? No signature, no emojis, just those words. He knew. I forwarded it to Ramirez immediately. He's tracking us in real time, I wrote. Find the leak. That night, Boston was drenched in freezing rain. Wind rattled the hospital windows as I sat beside Emily's bed reading her favorite childhood book, Charlotte's Web. Halfway through a sentence, I felt it. That subtle instinct that something wasn't right. The lights flickered once, twice. Then my phone vibrated. Another message. Nice room number. My breath caught. I rose slowly, stepped to the window, and saw it. Across the street, on the rooftop of the adjacent parking structure, a figure stood in the rain, barely visible beneath an umbrella. Even from that distance, I knew it was him. The next morning, hospital security found tire tracks in the alley behind the building. No cameras covered that angle. Ramirez tightened protection immediately. But the damage was done. Jason had been there watching. That night he appeared again, not in person, but on my phone. A single photo sent from an unknown number, me sitting at Emily's bedside, taken from the hallway. I turned cold. My pulse thundered. He was inside. I hit the emergency call button. Within minutes, officers swept the floor. They found no one, no unauthorized entries, no missing badges. But when the head nurse checked the staff logs, one badge number stood out. It belonged to a night custodian, a man who'd resigned 2 weeks earlier. Jason had found a way in. The hospital went into partial lockdown. Ramirez stayed on site. I moved into a guest room down the hall, refusing to leave Emily's side. For 3 days we waited. Then on the 4th morning, Emily's eyes opened, slowly, blinking against the light. Mom. Her voice was rough paper thin, but it was her. I pressed her hand to my lips. You're here. You're safe. She looked confused. Where's Jason? He's gone, I lied. You just rest. Her eyelids fluttered again. He said he'd fix everything. Shh. I brushed her cheek. You don't have to think about him. But in my chest, a storm was building. Because the moment she fully remembered, everything would unravel: his lies, his alibis, his crimes. And that made her a target again. That evening, as snow began to fall, I stood by the hospital window watching the city lights shimmer through the storm. Hope and fear shared the same heartbeat. Emily was alive. Jason was near. Two truths colliding like cars on black ice. I whispered to the glass, I don't care how long it takes, I'll end this. Because this wasn't just justice anymore. It was bloodline retribution, the kind of family revenge stories people whisper about but rarely live to tell. Hours later, Ramirez joined me at the window. We've put out a statewide bulletin, he said. Jason Lawson won't hide forever. He's too arrogant, I replied. He'll come back. Ramirez studied me, and when he does, I met his gaze. I'll be ready. That night, Emily slept peacefully for the first time since the crash. I sat beside her, exhaustion finally sinking into my bones. Outside, snow covered the city like forgiveness, but forgiveness wasn't in my vocabulary anymore. I opened my journal and wrote 2 words across the last page: he returns. Because I knew he would. And when he did, this story would stop being about survival and become one of those family revenge stories that burn into memory, the kind that proves a mother's love is the most dangerous force on earth. If you're still with me, thank you for listening. Stay close, stay safe, and don't forget to like this story. If you believe truth always finds its way home. When evil hides in plain sight, it doesn't look like a monster. It looks like a man who smiles while pouring your coffee, who knows the names of your friends, who kisses your daughter's forehead before driving her into the dark. For weeks, I'd been living in that realization that Jason Lawson wasn't just a liar, but something far worse. And yet every time I thought I'd reached the bottom of this nightmare, the ground gave way again. It started 2 days after Emily first spoke. She was improving slowly, her voice raspy, her eyes fluttering between confusion and pain. Each time she opened them, she looked smaller, younger, like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed after thunderstorms. But there were details buried in her fractured memory, and I needed them. Emily, I said gently, sitting beside her. That night, what do you remember? Her gaze drifted to the window. We argued. He said the money was for us, for a business, a future. What money? The transfer. He said it was temporary. I told him I wanted to cancel it. He got angry, said I didn't trust him. Her voice trembled. He was different, Mom. His eyes, they looked empty. I felt something cold crawl up my spine. What happened next? She swallowed hard. We were on the highway. I told him I was done. I wanted to go home. He smiled, just smiled, and said, "It'll all be over soon." Then everything went white. Later that night, Ramirez called with news. "We've located a possible witness, someone who knew Jason before he married your daughter." Her name was Melissa Winters. She lived in Portland now under another name, running a small bakery. When Ramirez mentioned Jason's name, she'd gone silent, then asked to speak to me directly. I agreed. I wanted to hear the truth from another survivor's mouth. 2 days later, I met Melissa in a quiet cafe off the Boston Common. She was younger than me by 15 years, but carried the same heaviness around her eyes. "Mrs. Lawson," she said softly, extending her hand. "I've followed the news. I'm sorry about your daughter." "Thank you," I said. "Please tell me what happened to you." She hesitated, twisting her wedding band. 5 years ago, I was engaged to Jason. Back then, he called himself J. Allen. We were planning to open a small real estate firm together. He was charming, ambitious. My parents adored him. She looked down. "Until the accident." My pulse quickened. "What kind of accident?" "I was driving home from a property showing. He called me, said he'd meet me on the road. I remember headlights behind me too close, blinding. Then I woke up in a hospital. They said my brakes had failed." Her voice cracked. "Police found the lines cut, but the car was registered in my name, not his. The insurance payout was under his signature." I leaned forward. "Did they charge him?" She shook her head. "He disappeared before they could question him. Took everything from our joint account, $48,000. The exact amount Emily had transferred to North Harbor Consulting." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, snow began to fall, soft, silent, relentless. Melissa exhaled shakily. "I saw his face on TV after your daughter's crash. Same eyes, same smile. That's when I realized he was never after love. He was after life insurance." I nodded slowly. "He's done this before, maybe more than once." Her hand trembled as she reached into her bag and slid a folder across the table. Inside were photocopies of old police reports, photos of her wrecked car, and one detail that froze my blood. Her policy, like Emily's, had been activated less than 24 hours before the crash. That night I brought the file to Ramirez. He read in silence, jaw tightening. "This establishes a pattern. If we can link both cases financially, we have grounds for federal charges, serial fraud, attempted homicide." He looked up at me. "Melissa's lucky she survived." "So is Emily," I said. "But luck isn't justice." He nodded. "We'll build it." Over the next week, I watched my daughter grow stronger. Each day she spoke a little more, remembered a little more. But recovery is never simple. Trauma doesn't fade. It lingers in the pauses, in the spaces between words. One evening, while adjusting her blanket, Emily looked at me suddenly and whispered, "He called someone before we crashed." I froze. "Do you remember who?" Her brow furrowed. "A man. He said, 'It's done.' Then nothing." I recorded her words, immediately timestamped them, and sent them to Ramirez. The puzzle was filling in, and every piece pointed to Jason and his network of accomplices. But the closer we got to truth, the more dangerous it became. A week later, Ramirez called. "We found Ellison." My heart skipped. "Alive?" "Yes, barely. He checked into a Miami hospital under a fake name. Gunshot wound to the shoulder." "Jason?" "Probably. Ellison claims Jason tried to tie up loose ends. We're arranging extradition. He's willing to testify in exchange for protection." For a moment, I almost felt relief. Then I remembered who we were dealing with. Jason always planned 2 steps ahead. That evening, I walked into Emily's room to find her asleep. The snow outside reflected in the window, covering the city like ash. I sat down, opened my notebook, and reread Melissa's file. 2 victims, 2 staged crashes, 2 insurance policies, and 1 man who believed he was untouchable. Righteous anger doesn't erupt. It builds layer by layer like magma beneath stone. That's what I felt now, molten rising. This wasn't just about my daughter anymore. It was about every woman he'd ever charmed, used, and discarded. The next day, I met Melissa again. She'd agreed to testify. We sat in a courthouse hallway, both of us silent, both clutching our statements like shields. "You think people will believe us?" she asked quietly. "They will," I said, "because truth has a way of sounding different from lies." She nodded, eyes wet. "You're stronger than I was." I smiled faintly. "You survived. That's strength, too." 2 hours later, Ramirez entered the courtroom. "We've got the warrant," he said. "Jason Lawson is officially wanted for attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy." For a moment, the air seemed to clear. The world felt steady again. Until my phone buzzed. A new text, no number, just words. "You think you've won, but she remembers more than you know." My stomach dropped. "Emily." I ran through the hospital corridors like a woman possessed. Ramirez followed, shouting for security. When we reached her room, the bed was empty. The machines still beeped the blanket half-folded. A nurse burst in behind us, pale as paper. "She's gone. Someone signed her discharge under your name." My knees nearly buckled. "What? When?" 15 minutes ago. Ramirez grabbed the clipboard. "Security footage, now." On the monitor, we watched the footage rewind. There she was, Emily, walking unsteadily beside a man in a long coat and baseball cap. "Jason!" He had come back. He'd been inside the building again. And this time he'd taken her. Everything after that blurred alarms, orders, lockdowns. Police swarmed the area, checkpoints went up, but he was already gone. The last camera caught his car leaving the parking garage at 4:22 p.m., heading south on I-93. Ramirez slammed his hand against the desk. "We'll find him." But I couldn't wait. I turned to him. "You do what you have to, but I'm not sitting here while my daughter is in his hands again." He tried to stop me, but it was too late. Because rage like mine doesn't wait for procedure. It burns everything between pain and action. That night I packed a single bag, documents, cash, phone, gun license renewed decades ago, but still valid. The storm outside had broken rain, turning to sleet. As I stepped out, I caught my reflection in the window, hair, gray eyes, hollow but alive. "Let's finish this," I whispered. Justice had become personal long ago, but now it was something more primal, sacred. I wasn't hunting for revenge. I was hunting for closure for every woman who never got the chance to speak. This was the moment when family revenge stories stopped being stories and became survival. Because in the end, this wasn't about punishment. It was about ending the chain of monsters who hide behind love. If you followed this far, thank you. Stay with me, because what happens next will show you what justice looks like when it finally finds its voice. When you've lost everything once, fear stops working the way it should. It doesn't paralyze you anymore, it sharpens you. It makes every breath a calculation, every mile a vow. That's how I drove through the storm that night, headlights cutting through sleet like blades. Somewhere ahead of me, Jason Lawson had my daughter again. But this time, he wasn't just running from the police. He was running from me. Ramirez's voice crackled through the car speaker. "We've issued an Amber Alert. State troopers are watching I-93. We'll find them." "No," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos. "I'll find them first." He started to protest, but I hung up. I'd spent my whole life solving problems men said were unsolvable. This one was personal. At 2:15 a.m., I spotted taillights on a rural stretch outside Worcester, a black sedan matching Jason's car. I followed at a distance until the road narrowed and the rain turned to ice. When his car veered off toward an abandoned rest stop, I cut my lights and rolled to a stop behind a cluster of trees. The engine noise died, silence except for the wind. Then a sound I'd recognize anywhere, Emily's voice muffled, calling out weakly. "Mom?" My pulse hammered so hard I thought it would split my chest. I reached into the glove compartment, pulled out the small revolver I hadn't touched in 30 years, and stepped into the storm. The old rest stop looked like a skeleton window's boarded roof, sagging half-swallowed by vines and snow. Inside, Jason's voice echoed faintly. "Don't fight me, Emily. You don't understand. They'll kill both of us." They, for a moment, confusion cut through my fury. Who was they? I moved closer, every step deliberate. Through the broken glass door, I could see them, Emily tied to a chair, Jason pacing, his hair wet, eyes wild. He was talking fast, desperate. "You think I wanted this? You think I planned it? It was supposed to be clean, no one was supposed to get hurt." I stepped into the doorway. "Then you shouldn't have married her." He spun around, eyes wide. "Maggie, don't." My voice was calm, colder than the storm outside. "You lost the right to say my name." He raised his hand slowly. "You don't understand. They came after me first. I owed them money. They said if I didn't deliver the insurance payout, they'd take her anyway." "Who?" "The people behind North Harbor. Ellison wasn't the boss. He was the middleman. There's someone else. You have to believe me." Emily was crying softly now. "Mom, please." I kept my eyes on him. "Untie her." "Maggie, listen. Untie her or I will shoot you where you stand." For a long moment he hesitated. Then he dropped to his knees and began to loosen the ropes. When Emily's arms were free, she crawled toward me, trembling. I caught her, held her against my chest, and for the first time since the crash, I felt something like life return to both of us. "You're safe," I whispered. "You're safe now." Behind us, Jason sank to the floor, head in his hands. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he muttered. "You think I'm the monster. I was trying to protect her." "By killing her," I said. He looked up, eyes hollow. "By saving her from them." The sirens came minutes later, Ramirez's team state troopers, flashing lights turning the snow into chaos. Jason didn't resist arrest. He just looked at me once, almost pleading, before they dragged him away. And in that instant I saw it not remorse, not love, but exhaustion. The kind that comes from carrying secrets too heavy for one man to bear. 2 days later, back in Boston, Ramirez called me into his office. "We found something in Jason's car," he said, a voice recording stored in the vehicle's onboard system. It was never transmitted, probably meant to be deleted. He handed me a small device. I hesitated. "Do I want to hear this?" He shrugged. "Maybe not, but you should." "At home I played it." Jason's voice filled the room, low, calm, deliberate. "If you're hearing this, it means things didn't go as planned. Emily, I never meant for you to get hurt. The money, the insurance, it wasn't mine. I was covering a debt. They said they'd take you if I didn't cooperate. North Harbor isn't just Ellison, it's bigger. They own cops, banks, judges. You'll never believe me, but I tried to get out. Tell your mother I'm sorry." Then static. Then silence. I sat there for a long time staring at the wall. Was it true, or another manipulation, one last layer of deceit to soften his fall? I wanted to dismiss it, to hold on to the clean edges of anger. But deep down I felt it, the dull ache of truth buried inside a lie. The next morning I took the recorder to Ramirez. He listened quietly, jaw tight. "If what he says about North Harbor is true, this goes beyond state lines. We'll bring in federal." "Do it," I said. "I don't care how far it goes." That evening I visited Emily. She was sitting up for the first time, pale but awake, her eyes clearer than they'd been in weeks. "They told me he's in custody," she said. "Yes." "Did he say why?" I hesitated. "He said he was protecting you from someone worse." She looked down. "Do you believe him?" "I don't know." Her hand found mine. "I think he believed it. That's what makes him dangerous." For a moment neither of us spoke. Then she said softly, "Mom, I'm sorry." "For what?" "For not seeing him sooner, for trusting the wrong person." I squeezed her hand. "Don't ever apologize for love, Emily. Evil hides best in the shape of something we crave." She smiled faintly. "You sound like Dad." That caught me off guard. I hadn't heard her mention her father in years. "He always said you were the one who kept us alive," she added. I laughed softly through tears I didn't realize were falling. He wasn't wrong. Over the next few days, Emily began to walk again, each step a quiet victory. The press hounded us, but I ignored them. At night, when the house was quiet, I'd sit by the window watching the river glimmer under the streetlights and think about everything that had led us here, the lies, the money, the fire. And somehow, beneath all of it, one fragile truth remained: we had survived. A week later, Ramirez called with an update. "North Harbor's deeper than we thought," he said. "Multiple shell companies offshore, accounts a network of people laundering money through insurance payouts. Jason might have started as a player, but by the end he was a pawn." I closed my eyes, so it wasn't just him. No, but he lit the fuse. That night I went to Emily's room. She was sketching quietly, her hand still shaky but steady enough to create. "What are you drawing?" I asked. She turned the pad toward me. It was a woman standing in the middle of a storm holding an umbrella of fire. "Is that supposed to be me?" I asked, half smiling. She nodded. "You never let the rain put you out." I laughed softly, then sat beside her. Maybe it's time we both stopped running from storms. Outside, the city hummed ordinary again, almost peaceful. We had walked through fire and come out burned but breathing. Pain had changed us, but it hadn't destroyed us. There's a kind of awakening that only happens after devastation, when you realize survival isn't just about living, it's about learning to feel again. As I watched Emily sketch, I knew we were beginning to feel again. Later that night, before going to bed, I opened my notebook and added one final line beneath the chaos of notes and names that had ruled my life for months. "The storm is not the end, it's the clearing." I closed the book and exhaled. Because, for the first time since that terrible night, I wasn't driven by rage or fear but by gratitude. We were alive. We were healing. And somewhere out there, justice was still moving, slowly maybe, but moving all the same. If this story has reminded you that even in pain, love can rebuild what's been broken, stay with us. The story isn't over yet, because what comes next isn't about destruction. It's about redemption. There's a moment after survival when silence becomes unfamiliar. You've spent so long listening to sirens, machines, footsteps, lawyers, that when the world finally goes quiet, you don't know whether to rest or run. For months that was my life. Quiet, and for the first time it didn't feel like a punishment. Emily and I moved back into my house on Beacon Hill that spring. The walls still smelled faintly of smoke from the winter fireplace, the furniture exactly as we'd left it before the storm of our lives began. But everything had changed. She walked slowly still, favoring her right leg, but her strength grew daily. Each morning she insisted on making coffee, an act so ordinary it felt sacred. "Mom," she said one morning, pouring 2 mugs, "do you ever think we'll stop talking about him?" I thought for a moment. Probably not, but one day he'll stop being the center of the story. She smiled softly. "Then I can't wait for that day." The trial began 2 weeks later. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, almost claustrophobic beige walls, buzzing fluorescent lights, the faint scent of paper and coffee. Jason Lawson entered in an orange jumpsuit, thinner, paler, his arrogance replaced by something like resignation. He didn't look at us, not at first. But when Emily walked in with her cane and sat beside me, he turned. Just one glance and I saw it, the flicker of a man who finally understood the damage he'd caused. Or maybe he was just studying what he'd lost. The prosecution laid out the evidence like a surgeon opening a wound, the voice recordings, the offshore accounts, the testimonies from Melissa Winters and Grant Ellison. Each piece painted a clearer picture not of passion but of pathology. North Harbor wasn't just a shell company, it was a laundering operation for high-level insurance fraud, and Jason had been its perfect pawn, charming, educated, invisible behind a smile. When the defense tried to argue coercion, the prosecutor played his own words from that car recording. "Make sure the policy clears before midnight." That was the moment the jury's faces hardened. I didn't look at him again. I didn't need to. After the session, Ramirez met us outside. "He'll plead guilty," he said. "The evidence is overwhelming." Emily exhaled slowly. "So this is it?" "For him, yes," Ramirez said. "For us, it's paperwork and press conferences." Then he smiled faintly. "But for you, it's freedom." Freedom. It sounded fragile, like something that could break if you spoke it too loud. That night, I found an envelope in our mailbox. No return address, just my name written in a hand I hadn't seen in months. Inside was a letter from Jason. It wasn't an apology, not in any conventional sense. It began simply, "Maggie, I don't expect forgiveness. I wouldn't forgive me either. But there's something you need to know before I disappear into the system." I kept reading. North Harbor wasn't mine to control. It was owned by a silent partner, Judge Raymond Cole. He covered transactions, buried police reports, and made sure the insurance companies never investigated the payouts. Ellison and I were expendable. If anything happens to me inside, it'll be his doing. "You wanted justice. Here's your last piece of it." The letter ended without signature, just a single fingerprint pressed faintly in ink his. I brought it to Ramirez the next morning. He read it twice, jaw clenched. "Cole's untouchable," he muttered. "Federal judge, decades on the bench." Was I corrected? "Until you bring this to the right people." He looked up at me, half smiling. "You really don't quit, do you?" "No," I said. "Not when it comes to the truth." A week later, the story broke. Federal judge implicated in North Harbor fraud network. The media erupted. Years of hidden corruption unraveled overnight. Cole resigned, facing indictment. Jason's testimony combined with the letter became the nail in the coffin. Ironically, the man who destroyed our lives had finally helped expose something far greater, and in some twisted way that was the only redemption he'd ever earn. Emily and I watched the news together that evening. She turned to me, tears glimmering. "You did it." I shook my head. "We did it. You survived. That's what mattered." She looked down at her hands. "Sometimes I wonder what it means to survive. It doesn't feel like winning." "It never does," I said softly. "It just means you have another chance to build something that lasts." The months that followed were quieter, gentler. Emily took up painting again. She spent afternoons in the garden behind the house sketching the lilacs that bloomed after the long winter. Sometimes I'd find her standing by the river, lost in thought. "What are you thinking?" I'd ask. "About how everything that almost killed me taught me how to see." I understood. Pain had turned her into an artist again, not the kind who paints beauty, but the kind who understands why beauty matters. By late summer, the district attorney called with an update. "Jason Lawson has been sentenced 25 years no parole. Judge Cole will face federal trial next month." I thanked him, hung up, and just sat there staring at the sunlight stretching across the kitchen floor. It was over, truly over. No more trials, no more calls, no more waiting for justice to knock twice. Only life fragile and unfinished waiting to be lived. That night, Emily invited me into her studio. On the easel stood a new painting, a woman standing on a bridge at dusk, her reflection rippling in the river below. Above her, the sky glowed in hues of gold and violet. "It's called The Quiet Light," she said. I looked closer and noticed the details, the faint outline of another figure in the distance, blurred but recognizable. Jason fading into the horizon. "It's not forgiveness," she said. "It's understanding." I needed to paint him gone. I smiled, tears catching in my throat. "You did." Weeks later, we held a small exhibition at a local gallery. Emily's paintings drew quiet crowds, not because of the tragedy behind them, but because of the strength they radiated. Reporters called her the woman who turned pain into color. But for me, it was simpler. She was alive, and so was I. One afternoon, while closing up the gallery, she handed me a folded piece of paper. "What's this?" "A list," she said, "for the foundation." At the top, she'd written in bold letters, "The Lawson Foundation for Victims of Financial and Emotional Abuse." My breath caught. "We can help people like Melissa," she said. "Women who think love is supposed to hurt." I hugged her tightly. "He broke your bones, but not your spirit." She smiled. "He built my purpose instead." That night, as I walked home alone through the warm Boston streets, I passed the old courthouse. The lights were off. The building stood silent like a monument to all that had ended. In the reflection of the glass doors, I saw myself older, grayer, but unbroken. Grief had carved lines on my face, but those lines had become maps leading not to sorrow, but to clarity. There's peace that comes from justice, and another that comes from acceptance. I had both now. Emily had her art, I had my quiet, and Jason had his sentence, a lifetime to face what he'd become. The world had burned, but somehow we'd built something new in the ashes. If you've been following this far, thank you. Stories like this aren't just about survival. They're about what comes after. If you believe that healing is its own kind of justice, leave a light alike so others can find their way through the dark too. The first time we returned to Europe, I expected ghosts. The train from Madrid to Toledo glided through fields of gold, the horizon shimmering with sunlight that reminded me of everything we'd lost and everything we'd rebuilt. Emily sat across from me, her sketchbook open, pencil moving with quiet purpose. Her hand, once weak from surgeries and tremors, now moved with steady grace. We were no longer running from the past. We were bringing it into the light. It had been nearly 2 years since the trial. Jason Lawson remained in prison serving his 25-year sentence with no chance of early release. The North Harbor network had been dismantled, and Judge Cole, the man who once believed himself untouchable, had been convicted. Justice at last had found its way through the cracks. But for us, justice wasn't a destination. It was a process, one that led not to revenge, but to responsibility. And that's why we were here. Emily had been invited by a Madrid gallery to showcase her latest collection, From Shadows to Dawn, a collaboration with the Lawson Foundation. The exhibition combined her art with personal testimonies from survivors of emotional and financial abuse. Her story, our story, had become a beacon for others. The gallery stood near Plaza Mayor, tucked behind cobblestone streets that hummed with music and the smell of roasted coffee. Inside, sunlight poured through tall, arched windows, illuminating each painting like a prayer. One canvas stopped me cold, a woman walking barefoot across a storm-swept shore, her reflection fractured by waves but still radiant beneath the sky. It was titled Inheritance. Emily joined me, her voice quiet but firm. It's about what we pass on, not just pain but resilience. I nodded. And forgiveness. She smiled faintly. That too, but not for him, for ourselves. The opening drew a large crowd. Spanish-American and international visitors filled the space, whispering as they moved from piece to piece. Journalists, survivors, families. People who had followed our case, all gathered not for scandal, but for healing. When the curator introduced Emily, I stood at the back watching my daughter take the stage. The same young woman who had once lain motionless in an ICU bed now stood before hundreds, voice strong, posture unbroken. She began simply. 2 years ago, I believed my story had ended. But sometimes what feels like the end is really the beginning of what matters most. This exhibition isn't about tragedy. It's about choice, the choice to rebuild, to love again, and to believe that even in the darkest stories, there's still light. I saw people wiping tears. Others nodded as if recognizing themselves in her words. Later, during the press interviews, one journalist asked Senora Lawson, if you could speak to the woman you were before the accident, what would you tell her? Emily paused, then answered slowly, I'd tell her to stop apologizing for surviving. The room fell silent. She continued, when someone betrays you, they don't just break your heart, they rewrite the way you see yourself. You start thinking your worth depends on their love. But it doesn't. Your worth is what you build after the fall. Her words echoed through the marble walls of the gallery like a hymn. That night, as we walked back to our hotel, the streets of Madrid glowed under soft lamplight. Couples strolled arm in arm. Musicians played guitars near the fountains. Do you ever miss him? I asked, surprising even myself. Emily looked up at the sky where the stars shimmered faintly over Gran Via. I miss who I thought he was, she said. But then I remember he was never that person. He was the test that showed me who I am. I slipped my arm around her shoulders. And who's that? She smiled, someone who's finally free. The next morning, before the final day of the exhibition, I visited the small chapel inside Almudena Cathedral. The stained glass cast fragments of light across the pews, soft blues, deep reds, golds that seemed to breathe. I wasn't praying for justice this time. I was giving thanks. For survival, for truth, for the miracle of beginning again after you've been broken apart. The final night of the exhibition, the gallery hosted a closing reception. A group of women approached us, some from Spain, others from Mexico, Argentina, and Chile. One woman, her voice trembling, said, I left my husband after hearing your podcast last year. I thought it was too late for me, but it wasn't. Another added, you reminded me that silence protects the wrong people. I looked at Emily, eyes shining, and realized that our story had grown beyond us. It was no longer about Jason or betrayal or even survival. It was about legacy. When we returned to Boston weeks later, fall had arrived again, crisp air, orange leaves, the scent of rain against old brick. Emily's foundation was thriving, helping women find housing, legal aid, and financial independence. She was writing a book about the art of recovery, part memoir, part reflection. One afternoon, she called me into her office. "Mom, I need you to read something." On her screen was a draft of her closing chapter. "In the end, I don't define myself by what was done to me, but by what I chose to do afterward. I chose truth over silence, healing over bitterness, love over fear. And in doing so, I discovered something my mother always knew: strength isn't the absence of pain, it's the decision to rise through it." I felt my throat tighten. "It's perfect," I whispered. She smiled. "You taught me how." Months later, I received a letter not from Jason, but from the prison warden. Jason Lawson had died quietly in his sleep. Heart failure. No foul play. The news didn't bring relief or triumph, just stillness. He was a man who had lived in shadows until the end, while the women he'd tried to destroy had learned to walk in light. That I thought was justice enough. Spring came early that year. Emily's second exhibition, The Legacy of Light, opened in New York, featuring pieces painted during our time in Spain. Each canvas shimmered with renewal, open windows, dawn skies, waves receding from the shore. In the center hung her final piece, a portrait of two women standing side by side facing the sunrise, mother and daughter, broken once, now whole again. The inscription read, "Dedicated to every woman who thought she couldn't start over until she did." When the applause faded that night, Emily took the microphone. "Some stories begin with betrayal," she said softly, "but they don't have to end there. Because what we choose to do after, that's what defines who we are." I looked around the room at the faces moved by her words, at the lives quietly changed by our journey, and I realized this wasn't just the end of a story. It was the beginning of something that would keep growing long after we were gone. Life gives you two choices after trauma: to keep reliving it or to rewrite it. We chose to rewrite ours. And if you're listening tonight, wherever you are, whoever you've lost, whatever you've endured, remember, this pain can shape you, but it doesn't have to define you. You can still build beauty from the broken pieces. Gracias por acompañarnos hasta aquí. Thank you for staying with us through this journey, for every comment, every message, every story you've shared. If our story touched your heart, subscribe to stay with us for the next one. Leave a comment below, tell us what this story meant to you, and share this video so someone else might find strength in it too. Because in the end, what we've learned, what every listener over 40, 50, 70 can understand, is simple. It's never too late to start again. Never too late to choose light. Never too late to heal.